She was earning $9.50 an hour. He owned half the city when he slammed his fist on her table and screamed in her face over a cold cup of coffee. Every single person in that restaurant went dead silent because they knew who he was. But she didn't. And when she leaned forward, looked him dead in the eye, and said those 6 words that nobody in 15 years had ever dared to say to his face, his entire world shifted. What happened next shattered 2 lives forever, and nobody in that city ever forgot the night the waitress made the most dangerous man alive go quiet. The Cornerstone Diner sat on the edge of Ridgewood Avenue, like a forgotten postcard from the 1960s, all chrome edges, cracked vinyl booths, and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. The coffee was strong, the pie was decent, and if you tipped less than 15%, Patty Kowalski, the owner, would personally follow you to the door and inform you of your moral failings. Scarlett Monroe had worked there for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She knew this because she had been counting, not out of sentiment, but because she'd been promising herself that by the 2.5-year mark, she would have enough saved to finally leave Ridgewood and move to Portland, where her college friend Deanna Marsh had a spare room and a connection to a dental office that was hiring administrative staff. The plan was modest. The plan was everything. Scarlett was 26 years old, 5'4", with dark auburn hair she kept in a braid behind her neck on double shifts because there was no time to deal with it. She had a degree in communications from Ridgewood Community College that was currently wedged between her mattress and box spring because she'd run out of wall space and didn't own a frame. Her mother, Norma Monroe, had been sick for 3 of the last 4 years, a degenerative autoimmune condition that didn't kill you quickly, but liked to remind you every morning that it could. Norma's medications cost $640 a month after partial insurance coverage. Scarlett's rent on the studio apartment on Callum Street was $780. Her car insurance was $190. Her phone, the prepaid kind, was $45. She didn't go to the movies. She didn't buy new shoes. She cut her own hair in the bathroom mirror on Sunday nights and had gotten surprisingly good at it. But she smiled when she took orders. She smiled because Patty had a handwritten sign behind the counter that said, "Warmth costs nothing. Coldness costs everything." And Scarlett believed in it, even on the mornings when she'd slept 4 hours and her feet were already aching before the first customer walked in. On the night of October 14th, a Thursday, which was typically their busiest midweek night, Scarlett was already on hour 9 of an 11-hour shift. She had covered for Danny Reeves, who'd called in sick, but was actually at his girlfriend's cousin's birthday party in Trenton. She knew this because Danny was the kind of person who couldn't lie without posting evidence on Instagram. She didn't mind covering. She needed the hours. At 9:47 p.m., a black Cadillac Escalade pulled up outside the diner. Then another one, then a third. 3 vehicles with tinted windows, idling at the curb like they were waiting for a signal from the universe. Patty Kowalski, wiping down the counter, looked up at the window and went very, very still. "Scarlett," she said quietly, "I need you to take table 6. Table 6 was the corner booth, the big one with the high-backed seats, the one that couldn't be seen from the street. The one that Patty kept clean even on nights when every other table was a disaster. "I've got 4 tables right now, Patty. I know. Take table 6. Patty's voice had changed. Scarlett noticed it, that particular flatness that meant the subject was closed. She'd heard it maybe twice before, usually when something was wrong in a way that couldn't be discussed. She grabbed her notepad. The men came in first, 2 of them, both large, both wearing dark clothing that was too expensive for a diner and too casual for a funeral. They scanned the room with the quiet efficiency of people who had made a profession out of identifying exits. They said nothing to Scarlett. They moved to the counter stools and sat, facing outward. Then the door opened again. Dominic Caruso walked into the Cornerstone Diner like a man who had never once in his life considered whether or not he was welcome somewhere. He was 41 years old, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something that didn't apologize. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone, and a watch on his left wrist that Scarlett would later learn cost more than her car, her rent, and every medication her mother took, combined. He didn't look at anyone. He walked directly to table 6 and sat down. His name was Dominic Caruso. In Ridgewood, that name meant something specific. It meant the Port Authority contracts. It meant the East Side redevelopment project. It meant 3 city council members who got very nervous when his name came up in conversation. It meant a family that had started in the import business in the 1950s, legitimate on paper, catastrophic in practice, and had evolved over 3 generations into something that the FBI had a dedicated task force for, and the local police preferred not to think about on Fridays. Scarlett Munro did not know any of this. She walked to table 6 with her notepad, her pen, and the practiced warm smile of someone who had been on their feet for 9 hours and was going to be professional about it. "Welcome to Cornerstone," she said. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Dominic Caruso didn't look up from his phone. "Coffee, black, and whatever your soup is tonight. Tomato bisque, it's really good. Patty makes it from scratch." He said nothing. He was already typing something on his phone. Scarlett wrote it down and left. She came back 4 minutes later with the coffee and the soup. She set them down carefully. The coffee was hot. She'd made a fresh pot specifically because the carafe on the burner had been sitting for 20 minutes, and she could tell by looking at him that this was not a man who would enjoy lukewarm coffee. She was right, but not in the way she expected. He picked up the mug, took one sip, and set it back down with a sound that was more controlled than a slam, but communicated everything a slam would have. "This is cold," he said. Scarlett frowned. "I just made a fresh pot, sir. I said it's cold." He looked up for the first time. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they had the quality of someone who was accustomed to finishing conversations before the other person realized they'd begun. "Take it back. Make it again. And tell whoever runs this place that cold coffee is an insult." Scarlett picked up the mug. She touched the ceramic on the outside. It was hot. Genuinely hot. "Sir, the mug is—" "I don't repeat myself." She took the mug back. In the kitchen, she pressed the back of her hand to the mug's side. Definitely hot. She stood there for a moment, then poured the coffee out anyway, rinsed the mug with hot water to warm the ceramic further, and poured a fresh cup. She carried it back and set it on the table. He didn't acknowledge it. She went back to her other tables. Table 3, the Hendersons, a couple in their 60s who came in every Thursday for the meatloaf, needed a coffee refill. Table 8 had a family of 4, whose youngest had knocked a glass of water onto the floor. Table 11, a single man in a flannel shirt who'd been nursing a slice of apple pie for 45 minutes, suddenly wanted the check. Scarlett moved through all of it with the kind of efficiency that comes not from training, but from necessity, from being a person who couldn't afford to drop a single ball. At 10:22 p.m., Dominic Caruso raised his hand for her attention. She crossed the diner and approached. "Can I get you anything else?" He held up the coffee mug. "This is the same temperature as the last one." "Sir, I poured a completely fresh. Are you arguing with me?" His voice hadn't risen. That was the thing. It was perfectly level, but it had a weight to it, the way a storm has weight before it arrives. The 2 men at the counter had both turned slightly on their stools. Scarlett took a slow breath. "I'm not arguing, sir. I'm explaining. I made a fresh pot of coffee, I warmed the mug, and I poured it directly. If it tastes cold to you, I'm sorry about that. But the coffee itself is hot. I don't need a lesson in coffee preparation from a waitress." The word landed the way he meant it to, small and dismissive, like a thumb pressing down on something fragile. Scarlett felt the heat rise in her face. She thought of Danny Reeves at a birthday party in Trenton. She thought of her mother's medication. She thought of the studio apartment on Callum Street and the cracked ceiling above her bed, and the way she cut her own hair on Sunday nights because she couldn't afford a salon. And something inside her, tired beyond the ability to be polite about it, simply reached its limit. At 10:24 p.m. on a Thursday in October, in the corner booth of the Cornerstone Diner on Ridgewood Avenue, Dominic Caruso, a man whose family name had made federal prosecutors lose sleep for a decade, raised his voice. Not dramatically, not the way movies show, but it rose enough to cut across the quiet diner, enough that the Hendersons at table 3 stopped mid-bite, enough that the man in the flannel shirt at table 11 looked up from his check. "Do you know how long I have been sitting in this booth being served mediocre food by someone who apparently can't make a single cup of coffee?" And Scarlett Munro leaned forward, just slightly, just enough that the distance between them, the safe, professional, customer and server distance, closed by about 6 inches. She met his eyes directly. "Shout at me again," she said very quietly, "and I will end you." The diner went silent. Not the gradual quiet of people noticing something interesting, the sudden total quiet of a room that has collectively stopped breathing. Dominic Caruso stared at her. In 41 years, in boardrooms and courthouses and backrooms where the city's real decisions were made, in meetings with men who had reasons to be afraid and still found the courage to pretend they weren't, nobody had spoken to him like that. Though not his rivals, not his enemies, certainly not a waitress in a diner at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. His jaw tightened. The muscle in his cheek moved. And then something shifted. Something so subtle that Scarlett almost missed it entirely. His eyes changed. Not soft, not warm, but something in them recalibrated, the way a camera lens adjusts when the thing it's looking at turns out to be more complicated than the initial read. One of the men at the counter, the taller one, whose name was Brent Fazio, and who had been with Dominic for 11 years, actually stood up halfway from his stool. Dominic raised one finger, without looking away from Scarlett, and Brent sat back down. The silence stretched. Then Dominic Caruso picked up the coffee mug and took a long, deliberate sip. He set it back down. "It's still cold," he said. But his voice was different now. The edge was gone. There was something almost curious in it. Scarlett straightened. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples. Her hands, pressed flat against her notepad, were shaking, but she held them steady by force of will. "I'll bring you a new one," she said. Professionally. Pleasantly. As if the last 30 seconds hadn't happened, she turned and walked back to the counter. Patty Kowalski was standing at the register looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past 3 minutes. When Scarlett reached her, Patty grabbed her wrist and pulled her close. "Do you know who that is?" she whispered. "A difficult customer," Scarlett said. "Scarlett, that is Dominic Caruso." A beat. Should that mean something to me? Patty stared at her. "Child," she said very quietly, "please go make that man the best cup of coffee you have ever made in your life and bring it to him with a smile and pray to whoever you pray to." Scarlett looked at Patty's face, really looked at it, and for the first time felt the cold understanding of something significant settling over her. She made the coffee. She brought it to table 6. She set it down and said, without apology, without groveling, "Fresh pot. 5 minutes ago." And she looked at him evenly. He wrapped his hand around the mug, held her gaze. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "I know. Sit down anyway." "Mr. Caruso, and I said sit down." Scarlett pulled out the opposite chair and sat down. This was the first thing Dominic Caruso had ever said to her that she couldn't argue with. Not because of who he was, but because her feet were killing her and she'd been standing for 9.5 hours. What Scarlett didn't know, what she would learn in pieces over the weeks and months that followed, was that Dominic Caruso had come to the Cornerstone Diner that night, not because he wanted coffee, but because he wanted to be somewhere that didn't know him. He did this occasionally. His associate and legal counsel, a man named Jeffrey Hart, had been advising him for years to find somewhere anonymous to decompress. Somewhere away from the Caruso family compound in Westfield Heights, away from the offices on the 43rd floor of Caruso Meridian Holdings, away from the house that his ex-wife, Claire, had decorated, and that he'd never redecorated because doing so would require him to have opinions about curtains, and he found he didn't have the energy. Claire Caruso, née Claire Whitfield from the Boston Whitfields, old money with opinions about wine, had left him 3 years ago. Not because she was afraid of him. She'd married him knowing exactly who he was. She left because she said living with him was like living next to a power station. Everything vibrated, nothing was calm, and she was exhausted. He hadn't argued. He'd signed the papers. He'd given her the house in Montauk, and an amount that Jeffrey described as generous in a way that is technically still tax-optimized. He had 2 children, a daughter, Natalie, who was 17 and lived with Claire in Montauk, and a son, Corey, who was 22 and had recently joined the business in a capacity that Dominic was not entirely comfortable with, but had not yet found the right words to address. He was not a happy man. He was a powerful man, which is a different thing. The Cornerstone Diner had come to his attention because his driver, a quiet man named Raymond Pollock, had mentioned it once as the best pie he'd ever had. Dominic had filed that information away, and on one of his anonymous evenings had found himself on Ridgewood Avenue. He'd come back 4 times in 6 months, not because of the pie, which was indeed excellent, but because it was the kind of place where nobody looked at him twice, where the lighting was functional rather than flattering, where the conversations around him were about ordinary things, where the whole atmosphere vibrated at a frequency so different from his own life that he found it, inexplicably, restful. He had not expected to be told he would be ended. He sat across from Scarlett Monroe and studied her the way he studied everything, with total methodical attention. She was meeting his gaze with remarkable steadiness for someone who, he now noticed, had a slight tremor in her left hand that she was actively working to control. "You're not from Ridgewood," he said. She blinked. "I am, actually." "But you've got plans to leave. How could you possibly know that?" He didn't answer. He looked at her for another moment. "The coffee's fine," he said finally. "It was fine before." Scarlett stared at him. "Then why?" "I was having a bad night." He said it the way someone says the sky is blue, without particular feeling, as simple fact. "I took it out on you." That was incorrect. Scarlett Monroe, who had been in customer service long enough to recognize the difference between an apology and a statement of corporate liability, waited. "I'm telling you," he said, "because it's true, not because I want something." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "What kind of night?" And something in his face, just for a second, shifted. Not to vulnerability exactly. More like the door to a room that's usually locked, swinging open by accident. "My daughter called me," he said. "She's going to a school dance next week. She asked if I'd be there. I told her I didn't know if I'd have time." He paused. I watched her face on the phone call and understood, not for the first time, that I am very bad at being a father. Scarlett said nothing. "You asked," he said. "I did." Another silence, entirely different from the one before. "How old is she?" Scarlett asked. 17. "Go to the dance," Scarlett said. He looked at her. "I know it's not my business," she said, "but go, even if it's awkward. Even if you're there for an hour and leave." "Go," she asked. "That's not nothing." Dominic Caruso looked at the woman across the table, this woman with the braid and the work apron and the pen tucked behind her ear, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, like someone was actually talking to him, not to his name, not to his money, not to what he could do or destroy. To him. 2 days after the diner encounter, Scarlett got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. Spam calls had gotten aggressive in Ridgewood, and she was in the middle of helping her mother take her morning medications, which required patience and focus, because Norma Monroe's hands shook, and she hated help, but accepted it from Scarlett more than anyone. She answered. "Miss Monroe." A man's voice, not Dominic's. Polished, careful, the voice of someone who spoke for someone else. "My name is Jeffrey Hart. I'm calling on behalf of Caruso Meridian Holdings regarding—" Scarlett hung up. The phone rang again immediately. She answered it again because she was the kind of person who felt guilty about hanging up, even on calls she shouldn't have answered. "Please don't hang up," Jeffrey Hart said quickly. "I understand this is unexpected. Mr. Caruso wants to offer you a position." Scarlett set the pill organizer down on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry?" "An administrative position at Caruso Meridian Holdings, $34 an hour, full benefits package. He asks that you consider it." Scarlett looked at her mother, who was looking back at her with the expression of someone who has excellent instincts and is using all of them. "Why?" Scarlett said. "He believes you were treated poorly during your interaction with him and would like to compensate. That's not compensation. That's hush money." Scarlett had not planned to say that. It came out naturally, the way truths sometimes do. "Tell Mr. Caruso I appreciate the call, but I'm fine." She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, aware that her hands were shaking again. Her mother said, "Who was that?" "Wrong number," Scarlett said. Norma Monroe did not look convinced. What followed over the next 2 weeks was something that Scarlett had no language for, because nothing in her previous life had prepared her for it. It wasn't harassment exactly. It was more like the subtle rearrangement of the weather around her. A man she didn't recognize sat in her section every other night for a week, always ordered modestly, always tipped very well, always left without incident. She told herself this was coincidence. She almost believed it. Then Danny Reeves, who had returned from Trenton and his girlfriend's cousin's birthday party, with a mild sunburn and absolutely no remorse, told her that someone had called Patty to ask about the staff schedule. A real polite guy, Danny said. Sounded like a lawyer. And Patty had said nothing to Scarlett about it, which meant Patty was frightened, which meant this was real. Scarlett was not the kind of person who panicked. She was the kind of person who made lists. She sat in her studio apartment on Callum Street with a legal pad and wrote down what she knew. A powerful man had been rude to her. She had been rude back. He had apologized in his own unusual way. He had then attempted to give her a job she didn't ask for, and now someone was asking about her schedule. She wrote at the bottom of the list, "Is this danger or something else?" She stared at the question for a long time. Then she wrote, "Does it matter if I can't tell the difference?" She tore up the paper and went to work. Scarlett had decided to avoid Table 6 entirely if Dominic Caruso came back. She'd worked out a system with Danny. If the black SUVs pulled up outside, Danny would take the booth. This plan lasted exactly 1 shift. 3 weeks after the first encounter, Dominic Caruso walked into the Cornerstone Diner again at 9:30 p.m., this time without the escort vehicles. This time in a jacket that was slightly less formal, dark wool, collar up against the October chill. This time he sat at the counter. He sat at the counter and he said to Patty Kowalski, who was standing behind it looking like she might pass out, "I'd like whatever's good tonight. And could you ask Scarlett if she'd come talk to me?" Patty sent Danny to get Scarlett from the kitchen. Danny reported back that Scarlett had said, "Tell him I'm working." Patty relayed this to Dominic. Dominic nodded slowly. Then he ordered the tomato bisque, a grilled cheese on sourdough, and a piece of the apple pie that Raymond Pollock had told him about. He ate all of it methodically and without complaint. He left a $200 tip on a $19 check. He did not ask for Scarlett again, but as he was leaving, he paused at the end of the counter, where Scarlett was refilling the coffee station, her back to him, and said without turning around to make eye contact, "My daughter's name is Natalie. I went to the dance." Scarlett went still. "She cried a little when I showed up," he said, happy crying. "I've never seen her do that before." A pause. "I thought you'd want to know." He left. Scarlett stood at the coffee station for a long moment, holding the carafe. Danny appeared next to her. "Who is that guy?" "I don't know," she said. "I genuinely do not know." But she thought about Natalie Caruso, crying, happy crying, and she couldn't make it not matter. The third time Dominic Caruso came to the Cornerstone was a Sunday afternoon, entirely off script, nothing pre-planned, no escort. He walked in at 2 p.m. in jeans and a grey sweater and looked so unexpectedly like a regular person that Scarlett almost didn't recognize him until she was standing at his table with her notepad. She stopped. He looked up. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer as if I'm not whoever you now know I am, as if I'm just the difficult customer from a few weeks ago who owes you an apology that he's still not sure he properly delivered." Scarlett studied him. "What's the question?" "Would you have dinner with me?" She stared at him for a long moment. "That's not a question," she said. "You didn't use a question mark." Something crossed his face that was startling in its warmth. "Would you have dinner with me?" He said it again, with the inflection this time. "No," Scarlett said. He nodded, as if this were the answer he'd expected, and perhaps even the one he respected most. "Because of who I am?" he asked. "Because I don't know who you are," she said, "and the stuff I've found out since the first night scares me, and I don't date people who scare me. That seems like a reasonable policy. It's kept me alive." He looked at her for a moment. "What if I could tell you about it? The stuff you found out. Explain it." "You can't explain it into something I'm comfortable with." "Maybe not," he said. "But I'd rather you say no, knowing the truth, than say no, assuming the worst." Scarlett set her notepad on the table. She sat down across from him in the chair that she'd sat in that first night, and she said, "You have until I need to refill Table 9's coffee. Go." What followed was 17 minutes. She knew because she had one eye on the clock the whole time. And in those 17 minutes, Dominic Caruso told her more truth than he had told anyone in years. Not all of it. There were things he would never tell her or tell anyone, because some rooms don't have doors. But enough. He told her the business was real and the reputation was real, and he had done things he didn't defend. He told her he hadn't become his father, but he hadn't escaped him either. He told her that he had tried, twice, to restructure the operation into something legitimate. Fully legitimate. And that both times, people who didn't want that had made it complicated. He told her Jeffrey Hart was not just his lawyer. He was also the only person who told him the truth about himself, and he paid him extremely well for the privilege. He told her that the job offer hadn't been hush money. "It was guilt," he said. "I was rude to you for no reason, and you're clearly working too hard for too little. And my first instinct was to try to fix it by throwing money at it, which is what I do with everything, and it almost never works." Table 9's coffee was getting low. "Why me?" she asked. "You told me you'd end me," he said. "In my entire life, I have been threatened by people who had actual, credible ways of ending me, people with resources and motivation and legal teams, and none of them scared me the way you did." "Because I wasn't scared of you." "Yes." "You liked that?" "I was fascinated by it," he said. "I still am." Scarlett looked at him. Then she stood up, picked up her notepad and said, "I'll think about it." She went to refill Table 9's coffee. Scarlett said yes to dinner 6 days later. She told herself it was curiosity. She told her mother it was networking. She told Danny absolutely nothing, because Danny could not be trusted with information of any sensitivity. She also told Deanna Marsh in Portland, because Deanna was her closest friend and a woman with excellent judgment. And Deanna said, "Please tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing." And when Scarlett confirmed that she was, in fact, doing exactly that, Deanna said, "Okay, but text me his full name and the address where you're going. And if I don't hear from you by midnight, I'm calling the police." This was reasonable, and Scarlett did it. The restaurant was called Sarto, and it was on the 20th floor of a building on Meridian Street downtown, and it had no sign outside because it didn't need one. Dominic was already there when she arrived. He stood when she walked in. She was wearing a green dress she'd owned for 3 years and had worn twice and kept because she'd paid $45 for it at a consignment shop and felt that $45 deserved more than 2 outings. She had done her own hair, which for the first time in years she'd worn down. He looked at her the way she decided later that he must have looked at things he found genuinely valuable, not possessively, not performatively, but with a sort of quiet, concentrated attention. "You came," he said. "I said I'd think about it. I thought about it." She sat down. "Don't read too much into it." "I never read into anything," he said. "I take notes and form conclusions." "Is that a warning?" "It's an introduction." The dinner was 3 hours long. Scarlett ate things she didn't know the names of, and they were extraordinary. She drank 1 glass of wine, nursed it the whole time, and told herself it was because she was driving. It was also because she wanted to remember everything clearly. She told him about her mother. She didn't mean to. It came out in the middle of a conversation about why she was still in Ridgewood, a city she'd never quite loved. And once she'd started, she couldn't find a natural place to stop. She told him about the medication costs and the insurance gap, and the plan to save enough to move to Portland, and how the plan kept getting delayed because the costs kept rising slightly, the way everything did, until the gap between where she was and where she needed to be felt not smaller, but somehow wider. Dominic listened without interrupting, without offering anything. She noticed this because it was unusual. Most people started problem-solving around the second paragraph. When she finished, he said, "What's her condition?" Scarlett told him. He nodded slowly. "My mother had something similar. Different classification. She died when I was 34. He looked at the table for a moment. "I wasn't there. I was in Frankfurt on business. My brother called me." "I'm sorry," Scarlett said. "I handled it the way I handle most things I can't fix," he said, "by doing something in a different direction." He looked up. "I restructured a portion of the Hamburg port operations in her memory, which she would have found baffling had she known about it." Scarlett laughed before she could stop herself. It was a real laugh, the sudden, startled kind, and something in his face rearranged itself in response. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. She thought, "This man is very lonely," and then she thought, "This is not your problem, Scarlett," and then she thought, "But what if it could be something?" She texted Deanna at 11:48, still alive. More later. "Deanna, that bad or that good?" Scarlett looked at her phone for a moment in the back of the car. Dominic had arranged a driver. She had not argued. It was midnight and she was tired. And typed, "I genuinely don't know." But it was 12 days later that everything broke open. Scarlett was coming out of the pharmacy on Branford Street with her mother's medications. The paper bag with the white and blue labels that she knew by heart, by weight, by cost, when a woman stepped out of a silver car and stood in front of her. She was in her early 40s, beautifully dressed, with the kind of bone structure that came from good genetics and was maintained by excellent sleep and expensive skincare. Her eyes were green, and her expression was the specific type of measured courtesy that people use when they're deciding how unpleasant to be. "Scarlett Monroe," the woman said. Not a question. Scarlett stopped. "Yes?" "My name is Claire Caruso." She paused to let that land. "Dominic's ex-wife." Scarlett shifted the pharmacy bag to her other hand. "I know about you," Claire said. "He talks to Natalie, and Natalie talks to me. That's how these things work." She studied Scarlett with the practiced eye of someone assessing a situation. "I'm not here to warn you off or be theatrical about it. I'm here because I have information that affects you, and I believe you deserve it." Scarlett waited. Claire looked at her carefully. "Are you aware that there are currently 2 separate federal investigations in which Dominic's name appears?" Scarlett said nothing. "One of them is a RICO case," Claire said. "It's been building for 4 years. The lead prosecutor is a woman named Sandra Cole, out of the Newark field office, and she is very good at her job." Claire's voice was entirely neutral, the way people sound when they've already processed their emotions about something, and are now just transmitting data. "I am telling you this not to frighten you, but because when I got involved with Dominic, nobody told me. I found out by accident, 3 years in, from a document I wasn't supposed to see, and I wish someone had stood in front of me on a street corner and said what I am saying to you now." "Which is," Scarlett said, "that the man is magnetic, and he is genuine in his way, and he will care for you in ways that will feel like nobody has ever cared for you before, and that the world he lives in is not survivable by people who weren't built for it, and that you will need to decide now, before you're in too deep, what you are built for." She got back in the silver car. It pulled away. Scarlett stood on Branford Street with her mother's medications and the cold October air and the weight of something that had been theoretical until 30 seconds ago and was now the most concrete thing she'd ever held. She didn't call him that night. She sat in her studio apartment on Callum Street, and she opened her laptop and she read everything she could find. The business profiles, the news articles, the court filings that were public record, the Wikipedia page that was carefully written in the way that things are carefully written when lawyers have reviewed them. She found a name, Sandra Cole, in a 3-year-old article in the Newark Tribune about a federal investigation into Port Authority contracting irregularities. The article was careful. Cole was quoted as saying the investigation was ongoing. Nothing had been charged. Nothing had been resolved. She found an interview with Jeffrey Hart from a business journal 2 years ago. Hart was quoted at length about the Caruso Meridian Holdings portfolio, real estate development, logistics, infrastructure consulting, all of it very clean on the surface. The way surfaces are when someone smart has worked very hard on them. She found a photograph from a charity gala. Dominic in a tux, shaking hands with the mayor, smiling the specific smile that powerful men deploy at charity galas, which is a different smile from any other kind. She closed the laptop. She thought about Natalie, crying happy at a school dance. She thought about what he'd said about his mother. I restructured a portion of the Hamburg port operations in her memory, which she would have found baffling. She thought about Claire Caruso on a street corner, choosing to warn a stranger rather than let her walk into something uninformed. She thought about what she was built for, and she thought about Portland, and Deanna's spare room, and the dental office that was hiring administrative staff, the modest plan, the everything plan. At 11:15 p.m., she called him. He answered on the second ring. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me." "I met Claire today." A silence. Brief. Controlled. "She told me about Sandra Cole," Scarlett said. Another silence. This one longer. "She had no right," he started. "She had every right," Scarlett said. "She cares about her daughter. Her daughter cares about you. She's protecting the chain." She paused. "I'm not angry with you for not telling me. We've had 3 conversations and 1 dinner. You don't owe me your federal exposure. But I need you to understand that I'm going to ask you directly. Is any of it true?" The silence this time was the longest. "Some of it," he said finally. "Can you be specific? Not on the phone. Then in person. Tomorrow." "Scarlett, "Tomorrow," she said. "Or not at all." He came the next day. Not to the diner. She'd suggested the small park on Callum Street, 2 blocks from her apartment, which was public and ordinary and hers. He arrived alone, which she suspected was unusual. He sat on the bench she'd indicated in her text, and he looked, in the thin November light, somehow less enormous than he did everywhere else. She sat next to him. He told her. Not everything. She believed him when he said some rooms don't have doors. But enough. The port contracts were real, and some of the arrangements around them were not things that would survive a prosecutor's scrutiny. He had been insulated from the operational side of those arrangements by enough layers that his direct culpability was, legally, arguable. Geoffrey Hart's opinion was that the case would not reach him. Sandra Cole's apparent opinion, based on the pace of the investigation, was that it would. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Geoffrey is working with a cooperation framework," he said. "It's been in discussion for 14 months. There are people below me in the structure who would be more significantly impacted. The question is whether what I provide is sufficient to satisfy what Cole wants." "And is it?" He looked at her. "Probably not." She absorbed this. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely asking. "Because you asked. People ask things they don't always get answers to." "I know," he said. "I decided some time ago that I wasn't going to be that person with you. Whatever happens between us or doesn't, you don't deserve half-truths." He paused. "You're the first person outside of Geoffrey and my brother who knows what I just told you." "Your brother knows." "My brother is part of the structure," he said, "which is its own situation." Scarlett looked at the park, the bare trees, the grey November sky, a woman walking a golden retriever on the path 20 meters away. She thought about Deanna's spare room in Portland. She thought about what she was built for. "I'm not made for the world you live in," she said. "I know," he said, "but I think you already know that and you're here anyway." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. The answer, when it came, was quiet. "Because you told me to go to my daughter's dance," he said. "Because you told me the coffee was hot, even when I insisted it wasn't. Because you sit across from me, and you talk to me like I'm a person who can be accountable, and I don't know the last time someone did that." A pause. "And because I would like very much to be someone you can trust. I haven't decided yet if I am, but I'd like to try to be." Scarlett Monroe sat on a park bench in November and looked at this man, this complicated, powerful, genuinely lonely man, and felt the very clear sensation of standing at a crossroads where both roads were real and both had real consequences, and nobody in the world could make the choice for her. She said, "I'm not moving to Portland yet." He looked at her. "Don't make me regret it," she said. Something moved in his face then. Not the camera-adjusted recalibration of the first night, not the guarded curiosity of the diner counter, but something raw, something that looked like relief. Like a man who had been holding something heavy for a very long time and had been offered, for the first time, permission to set it down. "I'll try," he said. "That's not good enough," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not. I know." 3 months later, Sandra Cole's investigation produced 7 indictments. Dominic Caruso's name was not among them. Geoffrey Hart had, in the end, delivered enough to satisfy the parameters of the cooperation framework, though the specifics were sealed and would remain so for a long time. Dominic's brother, a man named Patrick Caruso, was among those indicted. It was this, more than the investigation, more than the lawyers, more than any external pressure, that hit Dominic in the way that changed him. Not broke him, changed him. He called Scarlett from the car outside the Federal Building the afternoon Patrick's name appeared on the document. He didn't say much. She said, "I'm at work until 7. Come to Callum Street at 7:30. He came at 7:30. They sat in her small apartment, the one with the cracked ceiling and the degree wedged between the mattress and the box spring, and she made him tea because she'd run out of coffee and couldn't afford to care about that right now, and he sat in the one good chair she owned, and she sat across from him on the edge of the bed, and neither of them said anything meaningful for 20 minutes, which was itself a kind of language. He met Norma Monroe that night. Norma, who was having a relatively good day, which meant her hands only shook a little and her voice was clear, looked at him for a long moment and said, "You're the one who's been making my daughter think." "I hope that's not a complaint," he said. "It's an observation," Norma said. "She thinks plenty on her own. You've just given her new material." Dominic smiled. The real kind. Scarlett made a mental note of what it looked like, because she hadn't seen it before. Corey Caruso, 22, who had joined the business in a capacity that worried his father, got a call from Dominic in January. That was, by all accounts, the most difficult conversation Dominic had had in years. He told his son that the operation as it existed was going to change fundamentally, not because of pressure or threat, but because Dominic had decided, at 41, that he was no longer willing to hand his children a structure they'd have to outrun. Corey argued. There was shouting on one end. The call lasted 90 minutes. Corey called Natalie afterward and said, "Dad's different." Natalie said, "I know. She happened." The Cornerstone Diner on Ridgewood Avenue continued to operate. Patty Kowalski continued to make tomato bisque from scratch and enforce the 15% tipping policy. Danny Reeves continued to call in sick on occasion and post evidence on Instagram. Scarlett Monroe continued to work there for a time, not because she had to, but because she wasn't ready to leave without a plan, and she was still building the plan, and this time the plan wasn't about escaping somewhere. It was about building toward something. She still cut her own hair on Sunday nights, not because she couldn't afford a salon anymore. Dominic had, in a gesture of characteristic bluntness, established a substantial direct payment arrangement for Norma's medications that Scarlett had accepted only after a negotiation that lasted 3 days and resulted in an agreement she felt equitable rather than charitable. She cut her own hair because she was good at it, because she liked the quiet of the bathroom on Sunday evenings and the sound of the scissors and the simple competence of doing something herself. She thought, sometimes, about Table 6, about that moment. 10:24 p.m., the silence of the diner, the way everyone had stopped breathing. "Shout at me again and I'll end you." She had meant it as a line in the sand. She had not meant it as the opening of something that would rearrange her entire life. But that, she was learning, was the thing about lines in the sand. You never knew which ones the tide would notice. She was a waitress with $9.50 an hour, a sick mother, a plan, and 6 words that changed everything. He was a man who owned half a city, hadn't smiled in years, and sat down in a diner on a Thursday night, looking for somewhere that didn't know his name. Neither one of them went looking for what they found. The most transformative things rarely arrive announced. Scarlett Monroe didn't save Dominic Caruso. She didn't fix him, redeem him, or make him into someone he wasn't. She did something harder and rarer. She refused to disappear in front of him. She held her ground. She told him the truth, even when it wasn't polite. She sat with him in the quiet when he needed quiet more than words, and he, for his part, did what very few people in his world had done in a long time. He tried to be someone worthy of being trusted. That's the story. Not a fairy tale. Not a warning. A story about 2 people standing at the edge of their own lives and deciding, together, that the uncertain ground was worth stepping onto. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Scarlett's tired, determined eyes, or recognized someone you love in the quiet loneliness behind Dominic's power, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the most unlikely connections are sometimes the most real ones. And subscribe, because every week we bring you stories like this one. full of truth, full of drama, full of the moments that happen when ordinary people refuse to stay small.